Final reading. God grabbed me. God's Spirit took me up and set me down in the middle of an open plain strewn with bones. He led me around, and among them a lot of bones. There were bones all over the plain, dry bones, bleached by the sun. He said to me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" I said, "Master God, only you know that." He said to me, "Prophesy over these bones. Dry bones, listen to the message of God." God the Master told the dry bones, "Watch this. I'm raining the breath of life to you, and you'll come to life. I'll attach nose to you, put meat on your bones, cover you with skin, and breathe life into you. You'll come alive, and you'll realize that I am God. I prophesied just as I'd been commanded. As I prophesied, there were a sound, and oh, there was rustling. The bones moved and came together, and I kept watching, and sinews formed and muscle on the bones, then skin stretched over them, but they had no breath in them. He said to me, "Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of Man. Tell the breath, God, the Master says, come from the four winds. Come, breath. Breathe on these slain bodies. Breathe life." So I prophesied, just as he commanded me. The breath entered them, and they came alive. They stood up on their feet, a huge army. Then God said to me, "Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Listen to what they're saying. Our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. There's nothing left of us. Therefore, prophesy. Tell them, God the Master says, I'll dig up your graves and bring you out alive, O my people. Then I'll take you straight to the land of Israel. When I dig up graves and bring you out as my people, you'll realize then that I am God. I'll breathe my life into you and you'll live. Then I'll lead you straight back to your land and you'll realize that I am God. I've said it and I'll do it. God's decree." As I begin the sermon this morning, I'm probably going to date myself here with what I'm about to say, but when I was growing up, when I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to have a pager, or what some may call a beeper. That's really sad. They were the things to have before the introduction of what we might call accessible cell phones. It allowed my parents, it was a good thing because it allowed my parents the ability to keep track of me by sending me a page that notified me to either call them from a landline if I could find one, or to actually have to pull over and find a payphone. You might have, when's the last time anybody seen a payphone? That's been a while. But I could pull over at a payphone, dig through my pockets in hope of having enough change to make that call to them so that I could check in and ensure that I would be home at the agreed upon time. Time changed fast, even while I was in high school, with the introduction of heavy and bulky cell phones became a regular staple for a lot of kids my age. Next came flip phones, which are still available, and I actually heard that they're kind of making a comeback, even though I haven't really seen them yet. But it was around this time when people had flip phones where personalized ringtones became a thing. Different songs for different persons that called you. I don't think people use ringtones that much anymore. Most seem to keep their phones on perpetual states of silence or vibrating, which makes it next to impossible to locate them when you've misplaced your phone for the 10th time that day. But at one time, ringtones were a big deal. And my favorite for the longest time that I had on my own phone was the theme song to Sanford and Son. I love that. Like when people called me and that song kicked on, it just made me happy every time somebody called. I may even go back and download it and use it as my ringtone. That was mine. But when I met Lauren, I discovered she had her own personal favorite. Well, she actually had two favorites that I used to hear a lot. When I first met her, I remember one being the theme for Jurassic Park. That was the one that was on her phone. But the one that stuck with me, and I think she still has it on her phone today, was the one it was the Indiana Jones theme. Like That's the one that comes on when I would call her. And as a music person, and my wife being a talented musician, I wasn't surprised to see her love for the composer John Williams, who had done both the scores for both movie franchises. But for those who have spoken to my wife and know a little bit about her education, they know that she possesses a dual degree, not only in music, but in physical anthropology as well. Anthropology is the study of societies, it's the study of cultures and how they develop over a period of time. I can remember, when me and Lauren first started dating, I can remember calling her up one Friday night very early on in our relationship, and I was going to ask her to go do something, and I'm sure that she was going to say yes. But she told me she couldn't hang out that night because she was doing something studying human bones over at UNC Greensboro. Never been turned down that way before. Never had that happen. That was original. That's the physical part of anthropology, which has 4 branches altogether. So some of those are the linguistics, cultural, archaeological, and then, like my wife, the physical anthropology. Like me, maybe some of you are wondering how Lauren became interested in that field. I mean, that's a pretty nice gap between that of music and physical anthropology. You know, I asked her once how this happened, and she told me she credits her lifelong crush on Harrison Ford and his Indiana Jones character. And that's when the ringtone began to make a lot more sense to me. The excavation and study of bones is fascinating. It can tell us so much about a person, about time, and about place. Over the years, Lauren has shared with me how the study of bones that anthropologists can tell the biological gender from remains. That anthropologists, these people, they can deduce roughly the age of a person when they die. Bones can point to certain injuries or sickness a person might have had or any trauma they might have experienced. She shared with me once that you can take a skull and look for certain ridges present on the teeth and tell if that person had trauma as a child that would be associated with the diet of food or the lack of food that was available to them. Bones also tell us about the nutrition of a person, what they ate and how often. Bones can also shed light on if a person was from a certain class in their society and if they had received medical treatment. Anthropologists can answer these questions by seeing whether or not any bones were broken and mended as a good indicator that the person had the capabilities to receive medical treatment. And of course, bones can offer us a chance to see how someone died. Lauren even shared with me the fun fact that you can tell if a major injury to a bone happened before or after the person died because of the injury happened while they were alive. There would be evidence of the bone, there would be some growth around the injury, which doesn't happen after a person has died. She explained this detail with me using the example of trepanation. I was going to tell y'all what that was about this morning, but it's kind of early, and some of y'all may be in the middle of eating breakfast while watching this, so I'll let you discover what trepanation is for yourself. You can just Google that later. I'm sure you'll thank me for this courtesy. The point is, the study of bones can enlighten us as to what and how a society of people, how they lived, their day-to-day lifestyle, and what type of culture they help produce. This morning, I want to see if we can perhaps add one more anthropological branch to the 4 I already mentioned. Might it be a good practice for those of the Christian faith to perform a spiritual analysis of our own bones, to see what we might find, what might be called spiritual anthropology. And hopefully, it will help us take some inventory of who we are as a people of a particular faith. What better way to introduce this than going to a valley of dry bones, as our text suggests this morning. But first, we might want to see who our anthropologist example is. Ezekiel. Ezekiel is a complex and unique biblical character. While we see many examples of what Hebrew Scripture describes as major prophets like that of Isaiah and Jeremiah, and minor ones like Amos and Jonah, none are like Ezekiel. The story and times of Ezekiel, they overlap slightly with that of the prophet Jeremiah as well. But Ezekiel is thought to have been a generation or so after that prophet from Anthropology. Both wrote of their perspective of one particular large event that consumed their lives, and that was of the Babylonian exile. Jeremiah wrote of its coming, and Ezekiel writings address what life was like there. The empire of Babylon was run by King Nebuchadnezzar II, who had defeated the Assyrian legions but would have an unsuccessful military campaign against the large Egyptian army. This hiccup in his conquest would see other nations challenge Babylonian rule, such as Israel and their king Jehoiakim. He stopped paying tributes. That's usually a bad way to get somebody on the wrong side, is if you stop paying what you had been paying them, so that's what happened. And this didn't go well, as you might expect, and Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Jerusalem in 597 BCE. There's some debate among scholars if Jehoiakim died during that time or if he was taken into exile and died shortly after. But what we do know is that him and about 10,000 other Israelites were taken prisoner at that time and taken into Babylon. Some scholars believe this first wave of captives were made of more prominent persons, and Ezekiel is thought to have been one since he was from a priestly family. Ezekiel then becomes something of an oddity, being both a priest of the establishment and then being called to be a prophet on the margins of his new society. It is from Babylon that Ezekiel will see the fall of Jerusalem 10 years after his deportation, as King Zedekiah, a ruler appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, revolts against him and brings destruction to the city in 587. Ezekiel witnesses all of this, and the impact it has on him is profound. Imagine something like this. Imagine coming from a prominent family. Maybe a good example, like for today, would be seeing how a child grows up like in a medical family. Maybe grandpa was a doctor, then mom or dad was a doctor too, and so there's this compulsion, there's this feeling that you have to be a doctor as well. It's something they always knew they were going to be, but for whatever reason, circumstances drastically change and opportunity is no more. Their identity is challenged and perhaps lost because of something. Ezekiel experiences this. He has prepared his whole life to be a priest because he's believed to have been taken captive probably in his late 20s, right at 30 years old when he's taken into captivity. And then his whole world is upended. He's a priest who can't be a priest. Given what he's seen through his exile experience and the loss of his known existence, an adequate depiction of Ezekiel would be of a person who is now living with a form of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. This would surely explain his eccentric behavior and the language he uses. From his call and his description of how he came to be a prophet, we are told he eats a scroll with words of lament and mourning written on both sides, and yet the scroll tasted like sweet honey. He continues to have priestly concerns for purity and impurity that causes him to use, even at times, some very abusive language towards female imagery. Perhaps what we best know of Ezekiel, but perhaps what we best know him for, is his ability. He displays this almost act of a performance artist. The prophet is commanded by God to do such acts as creating a scale model of Jerusalem out of a brick and an iron pan. And he even finds himself at one demonstration lying on his side for 390 days, flipping over on the other side for another 40 days, and all of this is done with what it seems like little input from him, almost as if he has ceased to exist as a person and is nothing else but a vessel of whatever the Lord is instructing him to do. The book chronicles his oracles of doom, his temple visions that he sees, his oracles against the nation, and then finally his promise of restoration. It is here in chapter 37 where this conversation with God takes place in this valley of bones. In this vision, the prophet stands in the presence of death. The bones are described often as dry, meaning there's no tissue, there's no muscle, there's no tendons. They haven't been on them for quite some time. They have been pecked over by birds of prey and carrion and viewed as worthless to all that look at them, since little hope can be found in their presence. Mike, this morning, we see these bones in this valley in such a way that reflects our own lives at this time. We stand in the valley now. Perhaps we are looking onto what could be described as the bones of depression, fear, uncertainty, and hopelessness. Gazing out at these bones like Ezekiel did then, might we play the anthropologist and ask what we might learn from them in a spiritual sense? As we do this, I invite you here in the sanctuary or those at home, close your eyes and hear this poem from Dixie Calhoun. Bone lay scattered and artifactual, wind rode like dead branches, whose tree bodies repeat the desiccation. All hope bleached and lost, living moisture evaporated, calcified memories of what was, or seeds of what could be. Wandering shards of vessels that once thrummed with pure energy, where honor and dishonor struggled, stripped of living water to walk the hills, needing only gravity to line the valley. It was never about bones anyway, rather a glimpse of pure power, a reminder of who's in charge of restoration. Real hope then lies in the source. You can open your eyes. The God of Ezekiel, often depicted in paintings of that scene, is positioned as hovering over the prophet, asked of him, "Mortal, can these bones live again?" It's this question we are asked too in many ways. Can what has been thought dead and lifeless be resuscitated? Are we to allow the bleakness of a moment to force us to answer with only our anguish? Can we only answer this question with mourning mouths as we look at our neighbors from a distance and read the headlines of rising death tolls in metropolitan areas? Do we stay in that dark night of our souls right now? Where do we even begin to seek answers? The priest, the prophet, this figure of strange delight, Ezekiel, guides us to go and seek answers from the source. Can these bones live again? Ezekiel asks. And then he answers, O Lord God, you know, only you know. This affirmation of his shortcomings, of his understandings that leads the situation, it turns it into one of action. An action that takes the prophet to move and to do something, to get up and partake in what's about to go down. God tells Ezekiel to prophesy, to speak over these bones, and to watch as flesh is restored and life is cast upon them yet again. The term used here is ruach, and can be translated as spirit or wind, but in this instance, its meaning is one of breath. God breathes new life into something thought far gone, signifying that all life starts from this source, and perhaps brings images to our mind of the Genesis story, where God first breathed life into the lifeless clay of the first Adam, or the first person. It is this image of restoration that carries out the end of Ezekiel's work, one that saw much mourning and lamenting, but the ending is one that encourages us to see that all is not lost. We are not to give into despair. Death doesn't get the last say, but looking at death, facing the dry bones, forces us to ask the question of ourselves. The first of those being, how did this even happen? There are many parallels that can resonate with us when we look at the state of our things this morning, the state of our world as we are just navigating through new times. I say we acknowledge those facts, but for the sake of our last few moments together, let us focus on this idea of spiritual anthropology as we examine the valleys of our faith that might be filled with some dry bones needing God's ruach, or God's new breath. Can we look at areas and see, like a physical anthropologist, some deficiencies in our diet? Can we see how there has been a sign of insufficient reflection, of insufficient prayer, a sign of insufficient healthy questioning that has led to our faith withering up, resulting in lifelessness? I shared this morning. This is not in my notes, but I got a message from a former student last night, and they're like, "Hey, I just want to see how you're doing, just checking in. By the way, I miss our time together. I don't get to ask the questions that I used to. I'm being told things when I wish I could work to try to understand them." That's the kind of lifelessness that can happen. That's the kind of lifelessness I think those bones represent. Can we acknowledge that in a very macabre kind of fashion, that there are those of us who have stood and maybe even propped up those dry bones in an effort to display them as living? Might we switch out the word bones here for traditions? Might we switch out the valley of dry bones instead for the valley of dry doctrine? If we are to act with the humbleness of Ezekiel, we must do so in a way that both sees God as the source for new life, but also granting us with the ability and the authority to call out when something is obviously dead. For our faith then, We must have constant conversation with God. We must be analyzing and taking inventory of where we are at. And this sort of spiritual anthropology is done so to help us see if our bones are starting to show, if we are withering or not. And let this be a warning. Let it be a warning to us that wish to masquerade death as life. For those that masquerade doctrine as God's ruach. Let us be today convicted in the same way we see Ezekiel. To be convicted as those early church reformers, those Anabaptists were in the 16th century. To see the dry bones of the church around them, the church in their day, looking nothing like the living church they had read about in Scripture. Those early radical reformers saw a need to let go of the old authority that had gained power in the world through doctrines and creeds, what we might label as traditions, and went searching to rediscover the source, the one whom all life flows out of. Because when we do that, when we look at that valley of dry bones being propped up in imitation of the church, we see clergy and its members who are careless and insensitive. We see rules and perceived moral judgments, well-defined lines of who's in and who's out. We see little relationship with accessibility to God. We see self-congratulating echo chambers. We see schools of thought with little room for diverse perspectives. We see the Bible used as a sledgehammer to beat people down and to keep oppressed people oppressed. And quite often, it's those very people, who are being punished, who resemble Jesus more accurately than the people who are doling out the punishment. Can these bones live again? Oh Lord, only you know. Let us proclaim this truth and not be afraid to get our hands dirty as we help along in the process. Amen.